Hey everybody, it's Curse, and today I'm going to bless you with my honest review of EVERSPACE 2. So far, if you look at 2023, it has been a phenomenal year for games, especially for RPGs. We got Diablo 4, huge Last Epoch content updates, and there are a bunch of other big RPG titles coming up during the rest of the year. But on top of that, I don't want you to miss out on what might be the best space ARPG game on the market. EVERSPACE 2. So I'm going to break down the various strengths and weaknesses of the game and share them with you, so you can assess whether this is the kind of game for you or not. I'll wrap up by giving my totally subjective verdict for the game. Let's check it out. Irashaimase! So let me start by giving you some background on the EVERSPACE franchise, studio behind the game, and my history with it. The second title of the EVERSPACE franchise was officially released actually on April 6, 2023, following the success of the beautifully crafted roguelike space shooter with RPG elements, EVERSPACE 1. If you haven't played it, you should try that one out as well. However, with EVERSPACE 2, the devs didn't just wish to regurgitate the exact same gameplay loop with minor adjustments to cash in on prior successes. Instead, Rockfish Games decided to pivot away from the roguelike elements of EVERSPACE 1 and towards stronger world-building, RPG-inspired itemization, and deeper storytelling. They did, however, keep the backbone of the first title, which was the high-paced and engaging combat. And this is the kind of risk-taking, innovative approach that I like to see in devs in the RPG space. They even took a few ideas from ARPG late-game design in other games and implemented it into their own gameplay loop, intending to keep you entertained even after you complete the main storyline. In terms of the origins of Rockfish Games, it was kickstarted back in 2014-2015 from scratch with the pledge to make a roguelike 3D space shooter, which ended up becoming EVERSPACE. They totally delivered on that challenge, and Kickstarter backers were well rewarded for their support and patience in 2017, so it only took them 2 to 3 years. Given that track record, and given what they've delivered with EVERSPACE 2, I'm really excited to see what they decide to do next, because they've clearly showcased that they're not afraid to try new things. The initial release of the game was for PC only, but the console release is just around the corner, August 15th, so if you're a console player, mark it on your calendars and look out for this game. Unfortunately, I personally did not have time to play EVERSPACE 2 when it first released in April, even though I had bought the game many years in advance. And that was due to certain other juggernauts in the RPG space. So I'm very glad that I finally got the opportunity to try it out. And I sank something like 90 hours into it so far. I might get close to 100 by the time I'm finished with it. And if you just beeline through the storyline, you can probably beat the game in 30, 50 hours, something like that. I just get carried away clearing too much, and I also played on the highest difficulty level, so that slows things down a little bit. And on top of that, I also have 50 hours of gameplay in EVERSPACE 1 from, 5-6 years ago. So I've enjoyed my time with both of these games. Now that you have some of the history of the game development, let's discuss the actual game of EVERSPACE 2. I'll start with the artistic side of things, like the game world, the narrative, the dialogue, visuals, audio, etc., before we move on to the actual gameplay loop and certain gameplay mechanics that they've chosen to implement. Playing through the game, I felt like EVERSPACE 2 had a really engaging lore. It also had likable and relatable side characters, and the world building is really well done. Let me give you a bit of an overview. Before the events of EVERSPACE 2, in the first title of the series, you find yourself repeatedly being thrust into a spaceship combat as one of Adam Roslin's clones. And as you advance through roguelike levels, you uncover more and more of your background and the cloning project that spawned you. And then in EVERSPACE 2, You play as a single clone of Adam Roslin, and you no longer have infinite lives like in the first one. You quickly discover that the cloning program has been discontinued and you're one of the last remaining clones. Both games are set in a distant area of the universe, inhabited by the Ochre, an alien race that has previously engaged in war with humans over their colonial efforts in their system. It's kind of like when you're playing Civ and Genghis Khan comes over and settles right next to your capital, grabbing a bunch of your wine and honey and horses with his brand new city. Given Mr. Khan's foreign policy tendencies, there's only one possible course of action after that, right?
War. War never changes.
So the Ochre sniffed out the human colonial incursion for what it was, and after a period of war, a settlement was reached, giving rise to the section of systems that both games take place in, the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. But peace is fragile in the DMZ, and it is also a bit of a wild, wild west. And so we, as the Adam Roslin clone of EVERSPACE 2, start off with a limited objective to just get out of this crazy wild, wild west of the DMZ. However, during the process of looking for a way out of the DMZ, we become invested in the well-being of the DMZ and its inhabitants, human, Ochre, and even the goofy Horag. So scope creep is real, and by the end of the game, we end up on a mission to prevent another Ochre-human war that would devastate the DMZ. And I think everything I just went through, to me, is just great world building. We start off as a simple clone, a little copy-paste of another dude, coping with the baggage of our existence, on the run from powerful enemies that wish to erase any evidence of the clone project that spawned us, and eventually we end up carrying not only our own personal baggage, but also carrying the entire set of DMZ systems on our mighty backs. Talk about a hard carry that lost their lane, went into the jungle level 3, and ended up still carrying their team to victory regardless of those setbacks. We are the lowly underdog that ends up surprising everyone in the universe, and I can get behind a story like that. So I was engaged in that backstory of Adam Roslin clone number 907. The piecemeal delivery of various details also contributed to the engaging experience. Let's also make sure to talk about the side characters in the game. As you progress through EVERSPACE 2, you meet and sometimes befriend all sorts of characters in the universe of the game. Some of them even end up in your headquarters as your allies with increasingly aligned objectives as yourself. I thought all of the allies were pretty well written, and they were all fully voiced. They had all their lines written fairly well, and each of them has a unique character. And for the most part, their characters has a cohesive set of motivations that makes sense. Many of them provide great dialogue with humorous quips aimed at Adam and at each other. Even the onboard AI Hive is somehow incessantly sarcastic throughout our journey, and that brings a refreshing change of pace in between all the high-paced dogfights that you encounter. But after all these praises that I've given, I should also mention that some of the dialogue is a little bit weak at times. And the delivery can be overly silly, I would describe it. The motivation of some of the characters can be a little bit sus as well. I mean, we literally kidnapped Dr. Delia because she's a medical profession, and we need her to save one of our companions. Ben, I think was his name. And somehow she eventually ends up being a trusted ally. It reminded me of the movie Passengers, where a highly questionable deed was overlooked because the protagonist ended up saving the day. It's kind of like plot armor. I just don't buy it. But these kinds of character motivation loopholes aren't too numerous, and we can mostly overlook them. And the game world overall is still stellar, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. In terms of the cinematics, I mean, I've showcased some of them in the background here as I'm talking about the game. They're clearly low budget. They don't have as much funds as some of the bigger AAA titles. But given that, I still think they're fairly well done and enjoyable. I think with a much larger budget and given the solid storytelling of the rest of the game, I think this studio can deliver much better cinematics. And I completely understand the design choice here. They didn't want to use up too many resources on cinematics. It wasn't their focus, and they didn't have a legacy to uphold like Blizzard does, for example, being so well known for their cinematics. The last point I want to touch on is the ambience in EVERSPACE 2, which is one of its greatest strengths. The world feels truly immersive. It's awe-inspiring at times when you're flying around and seeing these massive structures, and it's just a pure joy to traverse. I found myself in multiple situations just flying around and taking it all in. So whether it's massive human space stations, intact or derelict, there's multiple different kinds, alien structures, dilapidated ruins, gargantuan alien skeletons of beasts you can't even imagine, epic spaceship wrecks, and so on and so on. The game has just really beautiful visuals. The lighting is really well done. That's something that many people commented on while I was streaming and they were observing the streams. And sound and music were always a perfect fit, depending on whether you're exploring and just chilling out or engaged in a tough fight. And I think even some boss fights have extra high pace musical themes in the background. So overall, the artistic direction of the game is absolutely top tier. And I think this is why, at least this is one of the reasons that this game has been so successful in the past with EVERSPACE 1 and 2. The gameplay experience is incredibly immersive. And if you're a fan of well-crafted science fiction universes like Star Trek, Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, or more recently, The Expanse, you should definitely check out this game, just for the world building and immersion and ambience alone. And now let's get into the elements of the game that I care most about, the gameplay loops. A game can have great visual, sound, and story designs, but if the gameplay loop is awful, it's not going to hold my attention. So in terms of gameplay, I'll start with the early game and exploration phase of EVERSPACE 2, the honeymoon phase of the game, when everything's new, love is in the air, and the various quirks for some reason seem endearing and not annoying AF. Most games with some level of depth and a well-crafted world are going to nail this. And EVERSPACE 2 definitely has all of that. For starters, the game has a plethora of game loop activities you can engage in as you progress. Let me walk you through the most interesting ones. Number 1, you can fly around and enjoy the open world and its visuals. And I frequently found myself doing just that. There aren't too many games that have that unique ability to satiate my sense of wanderlust and hold my attention on just exploration. Another game that does this exceedingly well is Subnautica. And let me show you some of the most intriguing locations so that you can see them for yourself. Number 2, you can focus on the main quest line. This is pretty self-explanatory. Number 3, you can complete side quests. And the side quests in EVERSPACE are actually fairly memorable. I found them more memorable than side quests in D4, for example, the other most recent game I played. In D4, side quests are tied to the renown system, so they very much feel like a chore that you have to accomplish before unlocking your full potential. In EVERSPACE, side quests are not as numerous, and they revolve around a strong set of side characters, so you can get more invested in them as you end up accomplishing meaningful progress in supporting your buddies. Number 4, you can also do jobs, which is essentially EVERSPACE 2's renown system. These are somewhat tedious, similar to D4's renown grind, but they can be a good source of item upgrades as you level up, so they're alright. And then number 5, there are also random events which appear around you as you're traveling from one location in the galaxy to another. It's kind of like Fallout 2's random encounters as you're traveling through the wasteland, if you've played that or remember that. However, in EVERSPACE 2, the random encounters are completely optional. If you don't want the encounter, you can just skip it. There are only 10 or so types of encounters, so the variety is somewhat limited, but they are a neat game feature for your first, 10 to 20 hours. Afterwards, you'll find yourself avoiding most, if not all of them. And here's one point I want to mention is that I really wish Rockfish did a little bit more with these random events. They feel like a missed opportunity. Like, they could have sprinkled in some scripted unique events. Like, you remember encountering King Arthur's knights in Fallout 2?
Oh, I maybe.
That was a memorable random encounter.
I maybe. Oh, I maybe. Oh, I remember. Oh, I maybe. Yeah, I remember. You remember? I maybe.
So I feel like there's some wasted potential with the random events in EVERSPACE 2. Number 6. You can also trade in EVERSPACE 2 by buying goods at lower price in one area and then selling them at a higher price in a different area. I ended up vicariously fulfilling my lifelong dream of building a ramen mercantile empire. There's nothing more rewarding than distributing umami across the universe through copious amounts of ramen shippings. The trading mechanics are fun to mess around with a little bit, but they're fairly basic. So I really think they could be expanded upon. And they're not really worthwhile engaging in after the first 10 to 20 hours of the game. Number 7. Every area in EVERSPACE 2 has secret stashes. And this is something I went a little bit crazy overboard with. They can be hidden in all sorts of nooks and crannies in the game, or they can be in the form of solving tricky puzzles. So if you really want, you can try to get 100% achievement for all of these. But just keep in mind that it's an extreme time commitment that can bloat your gameplay, probably double it up. And it can be very tedious at times, so it isn't for every gamer out there. I personally got most of them, probably like 95% of them so far. And maybe if I have a little bit more time and I feel like it, I might do the rest, because I don't have too much left. However, what I have left might be extremely frustrating to find out. Number 8. There's also mining for resources. You just shoot rare minerals in order to mine them, and that's basically it. This gameplay mechanic is fun early on, but a bit questionable later on in the game for me, just because there are very few uses for some of the endgame resources. Number 9. You can also get what are called signal encoders in EVERSPACE 2, which are essentially a map with random modifiers for the enemies that spawn in that map. Once you explode enough hostiles, a boss spawns. And once you defeat the boss, you are rewarded with a loot pinata. I thought these were a great addition to the game. A few extra enemy modifiers probably would have been nice. But I liked how Rockfish leveraged some of the replayability mechanics from other ARPGs. Number 10, another cool activity in the game is racing. You just take your spaceship in some predefined racetracks scattered across different systems, different areas of the game, and you have to beat a certain time to get the best race medal, platinum in the case of this game. I streamed most of my races and everybody in chat seemed to enjoy them. I enjoyed them as well. It was quite a challenge for some of them. Some of them were fairly trivial. I don't think the devs thought of certain, combination of skills that can be used to just make them really, really easy. But overall, I thought these were a good addition to the game. Number 11, and this is the final activity I want to mention, are the Ancient Rifts. These only unlock after you complete the main storyline and are similar to signal encoders, except you can fine-tune the enemy HP and damage, as well as be more selective toward the enemy modifiers during the rift. They reminded me a little bit of greater rifts in D3. You can scale the enemy difficulty up and down, and these are the primary way of getting legendary items in EVERSPACE 2. They can be quite challenging as you increase that difficulty level. So it's a fun little endgame activity if you're looking to challenge yourself as to how high you can go, just like with greater rifts in D3. How high can you go? I could definitely easily spend another 20 to 30 hours doing these with just testing different ships and different builds. So that is definitely a good addition to the game, and I love it. So there you go. I've highlighted and I've showcased 11 different activities. And you can see that there's a ton of content to try out and explore early on. And all of them are going to be fun as you try them out first time around. Towards the mid and later part of the game, most of these, at least some of these, are going to be tedious and not really something you want to engage in. Towards the end, you'll probably find yourself just doing ancient rifts and maybe the occasional 100% completion activity here and there. On top of that, as you progress through the game, there are 4 different tiers of items and ships. You start with common items and ships, and eventually get to upgrade to uncommon, which are green, and then rare, which are blue, superior, which are pink, and finally legendary, which are golden in color. Unfortunately, these feel a little bit shallow to me, and they're just kind of the same items with higher numbers and extra stat lines. I really wish there was a greater variety of affixes unlocked, potentially at higher quality levels. And then in terms of ships, we do have a similar situation where higher quality just means higher stats and extra passives. It reminds me a bit of the old XCOM games or Xenonauts games, where if you've played those, where you unlock different weapon types like rifles, miniguns, sniper rifles, using regular bullets. Then eventually you have the exact same research tree with the exact same weapon types, except with laser technology. And then later on, the exact same research tree with plasma technology. And I think there's even 1 or 2 extra tiers of technology. But you just basically just go through the exact same rehashed and trite research tree over and over again. And I think that kind of replayability is a bit forced and not that fun. I wish there was a little bit variety with each tier. But otherwise, the itemization is interesting enough to keep you engaged as you progress through the game. They even have legendary items that remind me a little bit of Last Epoch uniques, where the affix, the bonus that legendary item provides, completely repurposes the item itself or a specific skill, but can have a significant drawback that comes with that. I like this kind of legendary item design, personally. You have to work around the negative aspect of the item in order to get the most out of it. And that's probably something that Diablo 4, for example, lacks a little bit. The legendary design, the unique item design, can be a little bit more exciting. The variety of ships in the game is also something that adds a ton of replayability and content, because you can seamlessly switch from one ship to another during your playthrough. Ships retain 100% of their value on resale, so there is no penalty to respeccing your build. There are 9 ship types in total, 3 light ships that have high mobility but are super squishy, 3 medium-sized ships, and 3 heavy ships that can barely move but are extremely tanky. Every ship has a unique ability, resulting in completely different playstyles from one ship to another. These are a little bit like character classes in other ARPGs, except where respeccing is just absolutely free. And I personally love how these were implemented. Maybe not all 9 ships are 100% balanced, but it's still super fun to just jump from one ship to another. You get bored with one and just start another ship, and the playstyle is completely different. You have different ultimates for every different ship, and the ultimates very much dictate how you're going to play out your combat. So all of that depth in the game, I think, adds to a really unique experience that has solid replayability and is just fun. And I also wanted to cover the great variety of weapons that this game has. Starting with primary weapons, you can see that there are 10 primary weapons that you can choose from, and you can equip multiple ones on every single ship. In my case, I can equip 2 right now. So in terms of primary weapons, you have like a pulse laser, which is a shield damage type of gun, a beam laser. Some of these deliver instantaneous damage, while some of them have projectiles that fly in space and take a little bit of time, so they're harder to aim with. The railgun is basically your sniper weapon, the greatest range in the entire game. You have machine gun types of weapons, you have shotgun types of weapons, heat-seeking weapons, weapons that ramp up rate of fire as you fire continuously. A solid variety of weapons to choose from based on your playstyle, based on the type of ship that you're using. And it just adds a lot of variety into the game. I personally enjoyed the railgun the most, especially because I was playing on the hardest difficulty, so I was trying to avoid getting hit as much as possible. So railgun just allowed me to kill enemies without even being in any danger whatsoever. Just snipe them out of range. Another favorite of mine was the Gauss cannon. I utilized this quite a bit in the late game once I became tanky enough to engage in close combat. I found the Gauss cannon to be really well suited for the interceptor ship type. The shotgun was really nice for bosses, so that was a lot of fun to just switch over to a shotgun, get in close range, and just nuke down the boss easily and quickly. Beam laser is your ideal weapon to utilize for mining resources. And thermal gun can be a cheesy weapon to just kind of sit behind an asteroid and kill enemies without them even being able to hit you. So a lot of fun different playstyles with all of these 10 different types of weapons. And then you also have secondary weapons, which also add more variety into the game. Every single ship can equip 2 to 3 different secondary weapon types. And they range in variety from just regular homing missiles to EMP missiles to deal with enemy shields, and then armor breaker, destabilizer missiles amp up the damage that the enemy takes. Web missiles are surprisingly useful to slow down enemy engines and just make them easier to target. And there is a perk that increases your crit chance against slowed down enemies, so great synergy with web missiles. And then there's the nuke, as I like to call it, the cruise missiles. They're very slow, but the damage is nuts. Here's my nuke right here, 33.6k kinetic damage. There are these rockets as well, which are one of the few secondary weapon types that are not homing. They just fly straight, and you have a ton of them at 220. The damage is not that high, but you can spam them quite a bit, and they're great versus slow enemies like massive bosses. And it even says it in the description, strong against large slow targets. So these are decent as well. And then you have mines, which, yeah, they're not homing, but you fire them, they get activated, and if an enemy gets close enough, they explode, right? Web mines as well, similar to web missiles. So yeah, you have another 12 different types of secondary weapons, adding a lot more variety into the game. And check out some of the legendary items as well. While we're here showcasing items, you can see the bird's nest mine launcher. Instead of exploding, the mines become cluster nodes of large laser beams. So it's like a disco. Lasers going everywhere. And the webbing effect is really useful because basically it just creates a massive sphere where enemies, as soon as they enter, they cannot leave, they cannot do anything. They just get stuck. And so if you combo this with the nuke, it's a great synergy right there. The nuke also has a massive AoE of 300 meters. So basically, you just bird's nest, nuke the enemy in the middle of the pack of enemies, and everything dies. This is a legendary sensor, which increases the damage of one of your devices. And then you have a unique beam laser, which if you hold it down on a single target for 2 seconds, it gains extra damage. And then if the enemy dies during that time, you get some refund of energy. Another unique beam laser, which has a massive downside of making it very uncontrollable, but it's pretty fun. And then a unique shield, a unique coil gun that I showcased already, and then a unique plating, which gives you invisibility if you're not boosting. And then there's a funny little cargo unit unique right here as well, which essentially it works like revive in Diablo 2. If you kill enemies, you have a 40% chance to instantly revive them for 10 seconds. Great destruction. Some of the enemies actually deal legit damage. So this is a fun little legendary. Honestly, I love the legendary design in this game. Tons of fun. I just wish they had more. Because some weapons, like the beam laser, you can see there are 2 different legendaries, but there are so many other weapons, like one of my favorite weapons, the Gauss cannon, does not have a legendary for it. I would have loved to see a Gauss cannon legendary. And then you have another one here is the Castiel's protection, which creates 2 mirror images of your ship once you lose your shield, so they distract the enemy. And I don't have all the legendaries in the game on me right now, but this should be good to just show you some of the variety in the game. You also have attributes which kind of dictate extra damage in the case of firepower, extra damage for precision in the form of crit, extra survivability, extra cooldown and device utility damage, and then extra durability. And finally, expertise is the most interesting one because every single ship class gains a different bonus from the expertise attribute. So in my case, with the Vanguard that I have right now, I get rear attack critical chance increase. So if I'm attacking enemies from behind, I get pretty much guaranteed crits. The Scout gets a ton of extra attack range, so it can shoot from even further away. And there's a bunch of really neat expertise options that you can spec into more of this attribute and get a lot out of it. Something else that is neat in the game is these devices. Every class of ships has like 3 to 4 available to them, and they severely alter your playstyle as well. You can see here I have a missile defense system, which for 28 seconds it destroys all incoming missiles in a 380 meter radius, which is huge. And I've maxed it out to have the extra upgrade of also attacking mines. I can't emphasize how much of a lifesaver this missile defense system can be. There's also a legendary that can upgrade it even further, so it actually damages enemies. It's great. And then you have kind of like a vampirism support device, a shield that forms in front of you for 20 seconds, and then a teleporter to zip zap across the battlefield and just to increase your mobility quite a bit. And you can see there are a bunch of other ones that I'm not using right now, but can add different utility, different damage sources to your build. Like there's one here, corrosion injector, that deals shield piercing damage per second for whatever many seconds. And yeah, there's just all sorts of ones. There's thorns, an EMP generator that immobilizes everything around you in a 500 to 600 meter range. Tons of fun stuff to play around with and just adding depth to the game. That's what I wanted to highlight by showcasing you some of those. And as you already kind of saw with the primary and secondary weapons, the crafting system in the game is somewhat straightforward. You also have modules, which are your energy core, your shield, your plating, your sensor, your booster, and your cargo unit. But then you also have consumables, which surprisingly I find there's a couple of the common and uncommon ones that are extremely useful. And then components that end up being utilized for other crafting purposes. And finally, catalysts that attach to your weapons to give them a little bit of extra something. Let's say this one gives you a little bit of extra fire rate. These ones give you both energy and kinetic damage. So yeah, just extra attachments. It's kind of like sockets, think of them. And then these are, I don't know, gems or something. But you can only attach one, so there's a limit of one. So the crafting system is decent. Let's also cover the polish of the game. Does the game have game-breaking bugs or bugs that end up wasting your time, that end up being incredibly frustrating and just ruining your game experience overall? Because as we all know, some AAA games in the last decade, not some, but many AAA games have released in a really brutal state.
Not listening. Not listening.
Where the game was just not ready to be released.
No. No.
But tough corporate schedules did their thing and resulted in an unfinished product for quite a few AAA games lately.
I hate you. I hate you.
So how does EVERSPACE 2 perform from that perspective? Well, over my 90 to 100 hours, I only had one scenario where I got stuck in between these girders and I couldn't get out, and I tried getting out for like a good 5 to 10 minutes because I was determined. There's some sort of physics going on here. I should be able to just sneak my way out, but the way that my ship was built and the way that the metal girders were positioned in the space, they were kind of invisible. So I noticed that my ship was hitting something that wasn't displayed to me accurately on the screen. So I couldn't get out. I just couldn't. Which ended up costing me 5 to 10 minutes of playtime probably because I had to load game and my save wasn't that recent. So it wasn't the end of the world, but it was a little bit annoying. But that's it. That's the only bug that is worthwhile mentioning that I encountered. And to me, that's a really good track record. I should also mention though that I am playing the game in July. So the game has been out for a good 3 months already. They've had time to hotfix some of the worst bugs out there. And I don't actually know what state the game released in. But the state of the game right now is really clean. So you don't have to worry about purchasing an unfinished product. All right, now I want to share my final verdict for the game of EVERSPACE 2, given the 100 hours that I played. And I didn't want to just throw a bunch of numbers out there without any sort of relativity to them. So I added Diablo 4, but the most recent other game that I played, just so you can get a sense of how I kind of rate games and what I find more valuable for my own personal experience. So let's go through this. So I started with art, and quite honestly, this is not something that I put as much weight on, especially the story, writing, and dialogue and cinematics. In an ARPG, I don't care about these two nearly as much as I care about late game loop and activities, and even early game and exploration, the depth of the game, stuff like that. But basically all gameplay mechanics are much more important to me than the artistic side. So in terms of art, the story, writing, and dialogue are pretty decent. I enjoyed them very much, so I would give it 7, maybe even an 8, honestly. I put an 8 for Diablo 4, but honestly, I should probably put a question mark here because I skipped most of the story when I played the game as I was trying to rush to 100. Anyways, the cinematics for Diablo, I'm sure, are great. 9.5 I put there. For EVERSPACE 2, I put a 6. They're not amazing. I mean, clearly they didn't put as much budget into them, and I think it's a reasonable decision. And again, I don't care about these two nearly as much. Ambience, on the other hand, the feel of the game, the impact when you shoot a weapon, when you blow up an enemy, all of that is just so spot on. The sound design, the level of detail put into every single map, especially some of the more impressive ones like Prescott Starbase and a lot of the science stations, just a 10 out of 10. Same for Diablo 4. They nailed the ambience. The darker and more gritty gothic design was a good and welcomed return. So definitely max on the ambience for both games. In terms of gameplay, both games felt incredibly fun during the first 20 to 30 hours where everything's new. You're exploring brand new areas. You're exploring new ways to play, new guns, new weapons, new everything. And it's just a sheer joy. I definitely give that a 10 out of 10 for both games. In terms of activities, I already outlined all of them to you for EVERSPACE, and they have a solid roster of them. 7.5 is what I gave the game. Diablo 4, I'm probably being a little bit generous with an 8 here, especially as you get closer to the late game. But that is why I have a 4 for EVERSPACE 2 for late game loop, because there's really only a couple of things or one or two things that you want to be doing. One of them, the main one, being Ancient Rifts. And even then, the progression is limited, and it's more just about checking what you can achieve. With Diablo 4, the end game is similarly limited. I gave it a 5 because you have more than just Nightmare Dungeons. You can probably do a few other activities, but yeah, it's mostly Nightmare Dungeons, and even those are not that rewarding. They're not that fun. They're not well designed. So I gave both of them a fairly low score on late game loop. In terms of bug polish, Both games are really solid, 9.5. They're not bug free, but they don't have game-breaking bugs that make launch a nightmare. The overall value for price, and this is a tricky one. Diablo, I think it's like an $80, $90 game, but you can easily get 200 and probably way more hours of gameplay as they release new patches, as they release new seasons and new uniques, and you return to the game. You can get a lot out of this. And this is how I think about it. You know, I probably spent about 200 hours when the game came out in June. But I could spend a lot more over the coming years. And I've already purchased the game, so I don't need to spend any more money on that. Whereas with EVERSPACE 2, I spent about 100 hours, and I don't think I will be coming back to it. Definitely not in the next 5 years. I could be wrong, but that's just how I feel about it. In terms of overall value for the price, the game is listed at, I think, 65 Canadian dollars on Steam right now, and that is a little bit steep in my humble opinion. I think if the game was $40, I'd give it a 10, but I can see why they're listing it at 65. So if you can get a sale where it's like 40, $50, I think that is definitely worth it, and you're gonna get a ton of enjoyment out of that. You might not end up spending 100 hours on it because I really went overboard, but you're probably gonna do about 40 to 50 hours of really, really fun gameplay. And now for the final verdict. I put EVERSPACE 2 at an 8 and Diablo 4 at an 8.5. And quite frankly, both of those can go up with future patches, future updates. This is my verdict as at July, and I've played these two games very recently, so it is a very current verdict, but it may not be current a year from now. And some of you may be wondering, why didn't I list Last Epoch on here? And the reason is because the game is still in beta. I don't think it would be fair to compare a game that is in beta with two fully released games. But I can tell you this much. I would probably rate it lower on the art side, but I would definitely rate it higher on activities and late game loop. Both of these, especially the late game loop, I think is a lot more rewarding in Last Epoch than in these two games. So that's my verdict. The game gets a really solid 8, and quite frankly, I would not be giving many games a 9. And I don't think I'll ever give a game a 10, just to leave a little bit of room for relative ranking up there. So what I'm trying to say is an 8 for me is an incredibly high score. And then the 8.5 for Diablo 4, some of it is future loaded with the assumption that there will be patches and improvements to the game. So hopefully that gets delivered on and I don't have to downgrade this, or hopefully I can upgrade it in fact. And that's it for my game review for EVERSPACE 2. In my opinion, the best space ARPG game out there. The ARPG label is a little bit generous, but the game definitely has some strong ARPG components in it. So I think it is worthy of the label. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. And I also wanted to give you a quick little update on my plans for the channel. And also apologize for not posting videos in a while. I honestly did not anticipate this game to take this long for me to play through it. So it's been, 3 weeks since I last made any videos. And also I've had a hard time trying to figure out how to make videos for the game. I had a few ideas, but they just didn't feel quite right. So I waited until I make the game review video. I think I'll also try to make 1 or 2 additional videos just to share a few tidbits of knowledge that I accumulated through the gameplay. But that's gonna be probably it for me and EVERSPACE. Moving on to what's next. The Diablo patch is coming out this week, and the patch notes should be out in the next few days, if not already by the time I'm posting this video. And while it is tempting to go and play Season 1, I have to wait and see the patch notes. To be honest, currently I am leaning towards playing a different game. What is drawing me the most right now is Age of Wonders 4. But I haven't purchased it yet. I'm still deciding. We'll see. I'll take the time while I'm wrapping up a few additional EVERSPACE 2 videos to decide what I want to play. But there's a good chance it's going to be Age of Wonders 4. I think the turn-based format of it might make it easier for me to create YouTube videos around it. We'll see. I'm not 100% certain yet. But if you want to come out and check out what's next, I'll be streaming. So come by, say hello. And who knows, we maybe even do some multiplayer campaigns on Age of Wonders if it's worthwhile, just to test it out. Anyways, love y'all, and thanks again, especially to those that are supporting the channel even through this downtime. Hopefully I managed to pick things up a little bit. And yeah, take it easy. ごちそうさまでした。